The disciples eventually saw Jesus after his resurrection. There's so many accounts of different stories of how he appeared, just as they were walking on their way to Emmaus, as they were sitting down for supper again, just out in the streets. He appeared to them everywhere after the resurrection. They saw him. Among them was Thomas. He saw him. He saw the risen Jesus Christ. He was back. He could touch him. But he couldn't believe it was him. He said, I need to see those nail marks in your hands. I need to see it's you, otherwise I can't believe. I need to feel, I need to be part of this. He couldn't believe. And that's so hard, and it's even harder for us. There was a big crowd around Golgotha where Jesus was crucified. Everybody saw him being crucified. Everybody knew that he was crucified. Everybody believed that he was crucified. He got killed. That's on the record. That's in the books. Everybody knows that. The disciples, including Thomas, they ran away. The disciples actually didn't see him being crucified. Nobody of the disciples did, because they were afraid. Remember, they denied him, they ran away, they sold him to the Romans. The disciples just ran away because they were affiliated with that person that just got executed. They were in danger. They were in hiding. They ran away. None of the disciples saw how they crucified Jesus. Everybody else, the big crowds, but the disciples weren't around. Now, Thomas wasn't around either. He didn't see Jesus being crucified. But they told him, and he believed that like nothing. Of course they crucified him. They arrested him, so they must have crucified him. He didn't see that either. He didn't touch him on the cross. But he readily believed that he was crucified. Resurrection is a different story. He heard that too, but he couldn't believe it. Let that sink in for a moment. Thomas didn't see Jesus being crucified, but he believed it. Thomas didn't see Jesus being raised from the dead, and he couldn't believe it. That's how we function sometimes. It's so much easier to believe bad news. We're all Thomases in that regard. Bad news are easy to believe. He got killed. The world's a horrible place. As soon as anybody shares anything that sounds remotely scary or inexplicable, or you just don't want to hear it, but you'll remember it and you'll believe it. When you look on your Facebook, you'll see nasty stuff and everybody shares it because they believe it. And you share it because you believe it. Bad news spread quickly. They sell better. They're more memorable. They're accepted because they're truer, easier to believe. And generalizations are even better. If only it's catchy enough and is scary enough, people will eventually believe it. All Muslims are terrorists. All soldiers mistreat the enemy. All politicians are corrupt. The world is coming to an end if we don't do X, Y, and Z right away. Oh yeah. Must be true, right? Because it feels so real. It helps us explain that scary world out there with a simple sentence. And we believe it right away. Christ was crucified, of course. No question about it. Stuff like that we just need to hear in passing. We don't need to sit down and have big arguments about it. Just a half sentence. It'll sink in. We'll make it part of our identity. We'll believe it. When it comes to good news, that's a whole different story. All of a sudden, we are doubting Thomases. Because that can't be true. The people in Iraq are better off now than they were under Saddam. Our politicians really try to do the best they can for our country. Really? Yeah. Most of them actually do. Is that newsworthy? Does that sink in easily? That's outrageous. Positive news are not worth reporting. We don't want them to be true. We don't need them. Christ is risen? That's plain crazy. We're Thomases. That's what Thomas did. He blindly believed Jesus died on the cross, but he cannot wrap his mind around God raising Jesus from the dead. We work just like that. And not only regarding big world news. When a child is born, the first thing young parents do is they start worrying about the child's future. How are we going to pay for college? What's the world look like when they grow up? Will they see any trees still in the forests? Will they be able to swim in the ocean? What's the education system like? Are they going to find a decent person to live with? Blah, 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 blah. The world is coming to an end when we see a newborn baby because of all that scary stuff out there. And the first questions new parents have to answer is, are mom and baby okay? As if at first that would be a harmful, dangerous experience. And only after that, after only checking all those negative boxes, eventually we allow ourselves to say congratulations. Bad news are so easy, so true. And on the other end of life, we do the same thing. When a loved one dies, people prefer quick comfort. Death is part of life. Life goes on. That's just the way life is. Driving on. Really? No. Cursing, grieving, weeping, gnashing of teeth. Those are good things because they allow us to be true to our emotions. But we don't want them. We want death to be true and over with, and that's the end of the debate. That we have to have life and continued struggle. That there's still a heart that is beating and that is mine. That we don't see. No, he's dead, let's move on. We want it to be final, to be over with. That whole hope thing, don't bug me with that. I need to move on. Well, folks, that's not how God sees that. God sees that differently. So when the risen Christ appeared to his disciples, he asked them, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. Wow. Again, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. There's good news out there. And we're allowed to let him sink in over all that bad stuff that is so much easier digested. Blessed are we when we believe that Jesus is risen from the dead, even though we couldn't see it happen. I mean, the disciples had it easy. They knew people relatively close that actually were there just 5 minutes ago. That's easier to believe. For us, a couple thousand years later, it's harder. We cannot see and experience the way they did. But that's okay. We don't have to. Because here's the good news. Thomas made it into our Bible. Doubt is a sacred discipline. We're allowed, actually, we're supposed to be doubters. If the world were full of firm believers, we wouldn't need this place here. If we're all squared away and didn't need any doubt or straightening out, what's a church for? We're a community of doubters, strugglers, of good news in this world, really? That's what we need to hear. That we're allowed to doubt. That Thomas is one of the most important disciples in a regard that he's so much like us. John's Gospel explains why doubting Thomas is important and why we are supposed to be okay with just being a doubting Thomas. Here's how John explains it. But these are written so that you may become to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Stories like that are supposed to challenge us. And that challenge may eventually lead us to believe. It can only go through storytelling. Remember that Thomas? It was hard for him too. God help us